the stuff that I was looking at talking about a little bit today. Today's a little more off the cuff. I don't have as much prepared as I did on the previous days. And that was mainly because I knew when I got in here, the first thing I was going to be working on was trying to get all of my ducks in a row with the audio so that I'm not getting feedback and I'm not having problems. I discovered something yesterday, which was kind of interesting. So the topic that I started talking about yesterday was really focused on some things that I came across on X, and they were very. There was a podcast I listened to right before, and I'm going to go ahead and hop into that real quick, just to see what kind of go where I was before, and see what that does. Give me a second here as I authorize my access. There we go. Now, there's a show that I saw that I was rather interested in, having to do with somebody who posted on X. And let me just see first. I'll see if I can find that post on X again. There's a gentleman who did some rather interesting research since like 1978, Brian Romelie. And so I'll go ahead and bring up my second screen for you. There you go. So Brian has some really interesting and bizarre projects going on right now, which I've found I am finding quite fascinating. One of them is his website, this Multiplex website. So on the website will, if you check it out, the website will lead you to his podcasts if you choose to not pursue it. And one of the things that I did while I was here is I looked at all of the different posts that he has. Now, to be very fair, what you have to know is that a lot of what he's putting together here is being done, it's generated by AI. So the content is AI generated, but it's based on real content. And that's what's kind of interesting. So when I think about it, and I'm trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about yesterday, it came down to what I saw here. So let's see if I log in, it'll bring me to the feed that I had before. Let's see. I don't think I have it saved, the password. So I'll just stay on the top level of the site. But, RoboForm, by the way, is one of those things that I typically use on a daily basis for password management. I'm not sponsored by them or sponsoring them or trying to sell their product, but I am mentioning it because I find it to be very useful. And if you don't capture your password, well, you're kind of out of luck, which is just exactly what I experienced a second ago. But this article right here is the one that I was talking about. Now, this is actually a podcast that I listened to. It was just it was audio only, but it was a 2-voice podcast. There was a male and a female voice talking back and forth, discussing this. And here you can see, this is where you would go to listen to it. So let me just pull that up on another tab, if that'll allow me. Nope, doesn't. So the idea, though, that I thought was very interesting about this was there's an algorithm that he's building. And when I say he, I'm not sure if it's a he or an AI or what. But the concept behind this whole thing is a deep truth mode, where basically everything that you're focused on, everything you look at that's out there on the in the world for AI, stuff that comes at you from AI, the research that you might gather from AI, all of those elements actually have a likelihood of being, how to say this? I'm thinking on the fly here, so I didn't prepare any kind of like talking topics here, but But anyways, the idea behind this is that there's a prompt that when you do your search, if you use this prompt, it has a weighting system that says, if you see this post mentioned in a ton of different places all over the place, then odds are pretty good that it is coming from the consensus voice. And the consensus voice is kind of everything that's been happening since our initial foray into the internet, so like 1995 and forward. And the idea is that the internet, in some respects, is the ultimate groupthink. So is social media. So is all of the places that you consume media. So it could be TV, could be YouTube, could wherever. Now people, individuals like me, Scott, Elon Musk, and I'm not trying to put myself in their bucket. If those guys are Marvel superheroes, they're the ultra superheroes, like Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and all of that. And if I'm in that pantheon, I'm at the street level, like more like a daredevil or lower. So that's how I'm in my head. That's how I'm seeing some of this. But this concept is that when you have an individual voice that actually is sharing their information, sharing their knowledge, sharing study information that they've put together, they're usually doing it based on their own experience, their own experimentation, and their own efforts, right? We don't have that kind of voice when you listen to something that's based on consensus media, consensus audio, consensus opinion. The consensus opinion, as they called it, the false authority of the consensus system, I think he called it a Cathedral of Consensus in this article and in the podcast. And the idea is that all of these different sources that are out there that we are consuming from actually go through a consensus phase first. So if you think about how to rate well on YouTube, you're going to rate well by going up, getting feedback from people who listen and watch, and then tweaking what you're saying and what you want to say as needed to serve that customer. Now, one-on-one, small handful of people, a little bit of feedback from semi-like-minded people that are actually in the same bucket you are, no problem. But when you are saying, where did the clicks go? How many times did somebody join my stream as a result of it popped up in their algorithm and the algorithm drove them to me? When that kind of thing happens, that is going off of the topic of interest, where the algorithm says, hey, there's something here from a consensus perspective that other people might want to listen to. But if it falls outside the guidelines of what's allowed, you get a strike. You'll get you're going to get pushed down in the algorithm. You're going to lose your audience because your audience is going to fall apart over time. So it just fascinated me, this concept of having an algorithm that before I do a search, I use the algorithm to actually go for the most truthful or most truth-oriented content. And the weighting that is built into this algorithm, the purpose behind having this algorithm to give you some kind of details, consensus prisons, if you want to call it the consensus cathedral, I kind of like this perspective here. It's a consensus prison. So if you're in that same bucket, all the content you consume is going to be algorithm driven. It's going to be, did it show up in your feed because the algorithm says people would be interested in what you have to say? So your idea of a consensus prison is what everybody else would call an echo chamber. Pretty common, pretty straightforward. But if you were using a deep truth mode to power that algorithm, you would be looking for the most unique voice, the most unique thing. And that sounds a lot more interesting, doesn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be interesting to actually hear something being said that is unique and different coming from a totally different perspective than always hearing the litany of voices that are the same everywhere else. That's where I'm not necessarily sure that I'm going to do. I don't know if I can implement this in my own actions, in my own my own content, but I'm going to try, because what it comes down to is being able to say, I'm a unique voice. I'm my own person, and I'm deciding what I'm going to present to you on the fly in my own way, just to be sure that, in fact, I'm actually delivering something of value to you. What value would you have, or what value would you want? Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah. What would you do? How would you best understand the idea of hearing something unique every time you want to tune in? You're not going to get unique if you're riding the top of your feed. You're not going to get unique if you're always consuming what the algorithm shares and feeds you. And you're not going to get anything unique if you don't search and explore a little bit. So when I think about that, I think about things like, tuning into news, right? I do like watching some channels here and there, a couple of shows once in a while. Things like, I find the Gutfeld entertaining. I find the Five entertaining. So I might watch those, but that's going to be, again, a consensus narrative. It's going to be the same old stories. If you sit there, and I don't do this, but if you were actually watching Fox all night long, you'll see the same 3 to 5 stories throughout the night. It's like, okay, if you didn't tune in at 5, you'll get the same story at 6 so that you didn't miss it at 5. If you're going to sit there and watch all the shows from 5 to 9 p.m., you're going to watch the same show over and over and over again with a slightly different voice, slightly different perspective of all of the people that are actually sharing their, doing their show with you. So the idea in my mind is, if you want to be able to consume unique, interesting content, you're going to have to figure out some kind of way of getting an algorithm that you search off of that is similar to this, that gets you out of the consensus prison and gets you into new and unique and interesting topics. And one of the things that they discovered in this is they started looking at, one of the things that their perspective was on this was that we have been talking about training the AIs for quite a while now, and that there's a lack of data in the training, right? We've burned through all of the human knowledge already. And as a result, now we have to create synthetic data. And I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. But what I would tell you is that if you actually think about all of the human knowledge being stuck into the AI, and we have to create synthetic knowledge, well, AIs just became your biggest new echo chamber, unless there's some kind of an algorithm that's going to break it down and bring it into something different and unique each time. Now, the research that was done to come up with this topic or come up with this concept identified that the acceleration or the Cambrian explosion of knowledge that occurred for the human race occurred between 1890 and 1995, where everybody was doing unique, fascinating things. We invented, not invented, but we brought electricity to the masses. We created autos, we created planes, we created medicines, we created chemistries, we figured out ways to drill for oil, we figured out ways to do all of these things that didn't exist prior. And, if you just look at the technology explosion that occurred starting around 1890 between steam engines and railroads, all of that, it's just a massive, massive upswing of technology change. And we're still on that leading edge. We're still on a bleeding edge of technology just exploding. But with that in mind, how do you understand, where the original data is? So if you do your research on the internet, it's secondary, right? And primary research is when you put your hands on something. So here's an example. I want to figure out if the pressure, this, by the way, is a it's not really a prop. I caught this at a sales event, and it's covered with signatures of famous quarterbacks. But how I got it is a fun story of its own. But and maybe I'll tell it later or at another time. But this is not a fully inflated football. This would be a Tom Brady football if I was making a bad joke. And all of the other, signatures on here would be fully inflated. Maybe, I don't know. Anyways, humor aside, I hope you don't take that wrong. If you're a Brady fan, I'm actually a Brady fan. I like the guy. So when you squeeze this and you discover that it's not fully inflated, then putting air into it and pumping it up, there would be a kind of an experiment to say, okay, I'll squeeze it again and see if, how much pressure I need to put until the thing is fully inflated. And ideally, you don't pop it, right? If the pressure gets too high, it could pop. So you could be doing a test where you say, well, just how much pressure does it take to pop this thing? So you doing that direct hands-on experiment, that's primary source, right? That's primary source research. Now, for some of you who understand research and have gone down that path, done educational pursuits, you probably know this already, right? But secondary research is when you base your research on somebody else. And when you start researching the internet to discover how podcasting works, you're going to get the consensus narrative on how podcasting works. Today, I'm experimenting. I'm trying to figure out what draws a crowd in, ideally, what topics would be of interest to the folks here. And the only way I'm going to figure this one out is by actually doing it, right? So I'm, putting hands on and I'm saying, let me just try it and see what happens. And that's literally what I'm doing as we speak. So, and I'm putting a couple things on screen here because this is my prep process. And because I told you I came on today just raw, so I could, this is, I think the whole perspective of just doing it every day means you might have days like today where you just come in and say, well, what's going on today? And one of the sources that I like to use now is to just hop into Grok and see what is on the list here. Now, this list is going to be influenced primarily by stuff that might be occurring over on X that is kind of popping up. So I'm not going to go into most of these because, frankly, I don't really want to get into. I'm not going to do a news report on weather. I'm in Florida. It's nice. I'm sorry for those of you who are not. My apologies to that. But I'm not going to do a news report on the weather. I'm not going to do a news report on the Minnesota scenario because it's not really the focus of what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to go do something else. And I've got tasks here. In my tasks, I've created a set of investigations. This is where I'm going to start experimenting with that algorithm that was mentioned over on the other, the deep truth mode algorithm. So the idea that I was getting into was that there's content that may be able to be affected, how that content comes across, so that you are getting maximum truth, right? So there was an algorithm identified here. Let me see if I can find it again. And I don't know if I ended up somehow accidentally clicking out of the original. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I don't think, I'm going to have to do this research a little bit later and pull that together, and I'll show you the output of that tomorrow. But the idea was to take a task or have a task of the content that would get the truth-seeking algorithm tied into it, and I was going to try and put it into my task over here. Now, the task that I've got created, this runs every day for me, and I'm going to just copy this over. And this is what I typically do in preparation. Grab this, and then I'm going to bring it over into my Notebook LM prep. And what I want to do here is, let's see here, go back to think I can edit that. No, I'm going to just remove it because it doesn't allow you to edit it. So I'm going to add a new source, copied text, paste it in, and there we go. So now what I'm doing is pulling information in from the articles that I have on the other side. Now, it's going to bring a lot of the same content, same topics that I've mentioned in the that came up in the Grok search Grok super chat setup, and that will obviously be influenced. But I've got an algorithm or a prompt. Looking for a word because I've got something else going on in the background at the same time. But this prompt, the initial prompt that I have here, uses the concept of the persuasion filter and uses the concept of the two movies on one screen, as well as the Dilbert perspective and things like that. So this core setup allows me to at least have some upfront tone and considerations. And then what I tend to do is go over here and create a mind map from this. And I use the mind map to navigate the topics when I'm looking at it. So if at all possible, that gives me, if I'm not going to go into certain things, like I said, I don't want to go into the immigration. Clearly I'm going to just stick with some of the easy, light, fluffy ones today. So let's see what's going on with, you've got the UFC 234 and AFCON final, Big Brother in Brazil. That's interesting. We'll have to look at that. And then EXO music. And then politics and global events. Clearly we're going to have some other things going on, but I'm going to probably focus today on technology and AI, because that's kind of down the path of the stuff that I'm very interested about. And actually, this Grok Deepfakes right off the bat is one of the ones that I'm interested in, because I just found out I was doing a little bit of watching on X the other night, and I saw these funny videos of a cat sitting on a couch looking down at a carpet, and the carpet looks like it's a hole in the ground, right? Going down however far. So the cat's just looking over, and then the dog comes along and kind of instigates the cat to jump down onto that carpet, and the cat freaks out like it's falling, and then eventually realizes, oh crap, this is I'm on the ground, I'm not falling. And then gets like miffed and walks away, or maybe swats at the dog or whatever. So, and I was like, oh, okay, that would be funny if it was real, but it's not. And it's a deep fake. And so when I came up on my feed with X this morning, the first thing it said is, oh, by the way, there's a community note on one of the posts that you liked, because the deep fake of the cat, this whole scenario, which looked very real, by the way, fooled me. And I actually believed it. And I'm like, oh, great. And this is exactly what I'm saying about the understanding the primary sources, trying to figure out, are you consuming content that's essentially a primary source, or is it somehow a part of that cathedral of consensus that comes together with anything that's algorithm generated, algorithm driven, things like that. So with AI being our next great tool, and everybody having to figure out how to use it in a way that's logical, we have to figure out how do we make sure that we're not getting sucked in, right? How do we make sure that we're not in a situation where we're actually getting fooled by things that are deep fakes? So having something like the community notes on X that can help you winnow those things out is fantastic. But on the other hand, you're going to have to be able to decode this stuff in real time. And that's where the detect a hoax narratives, understanding persuasion, so that you can, when you hear keywords that either are repeated a certain way, or the structure of the content that's being shoved at you has a certain kind of feel or sound, you want to make sure that you're not consuming something negative or something false or fake. And there's a couple of videos that I've been watching on YouTube about streaming, just because, again, I'm trying to educate myself and learn more about how to do this so that I'm maybe more interesting and effective for people to join and watch. Those, I'm beginning to suspect that some of them are 100% AI-driven, AI-generated content. And if that's the case, then, obviously the tips may be valid. So there's maybe no reason for me to not watch them. But I want to know, some of the people that are showing up on these streams look just too perfect. My goatee when I shave, this is a mess. I mean, I do it consistently because I've been doing it since the day I got out of the Army, because I was in a unit that would not allow you to have any facial hair whatsoever. And so when I got out, the very first thing I did is I grew a goatee, because it's kind of my personal rebellion of like, I don't want to be told what to do. So, and I've had this goatee ever since. And now, I'm pretty good at cutting it exactly where I expect it to cut, but I still make these mistakes. A couple of weeks ago, I chopped into the side of it and I shaved the whole thing off. My wife was like, "Who the hell is this? Who are you?" And so I had to step back, let it grow in again. And, because she was like, you don't look the same. I don't want that. She didn't necessarily dislike how I looked, but she didn't like it because she was used to this. Now, if you think about you and you're making those kind of mistakes when you shave, or you're making those kind of mistakes when you groom yourself or whatever, you're not going to look the same or identical or perfect every single day. Maybe you can. Now, if you had a makeup artist helping you before you got on a camera or something like that, fine. But in reality, the vast majority of us, the people who are going to be your discrete voices that are not the consensus voices, like myself, I'm not a consensus voice at this point. You're probably not seeing my video bubble up on your feed like you will the things that you've clicked on in the past consistently. So that said, I want to be able to say, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm presentable. But if I make a mistake, oh well. And in AI, when you look at one of the videos that you might be watching, and you see somebody with facial hair, especially for me as a guy, when I see somebody with facial hair, I'm like, that's not real. And I can tell that's not real because there isn't a single hair follicle out of place. There's no mistakes. There's no, it's like if I've got a little salt and pepper going on here. The salt and pepper look, if it's perfectly uniform, like I got this one spot over here that for years I used to think I made a mistake and I cut in. No, since I was like 22 years old, I've had this one little white patch over here that drives me nuts. But so I got this tiny little white patch, and it's that's an imperfection that you could tell if you're looking at a real person or not. And when you see these people, their hair is perfect, the blend of gray to not gray, or the blend of different shades in their hair, if it's all uniform to the point where they look like they just fell out of a Hollywood set, you're probably looking at a deep fake, And the thing is how do we find those deep fakes on the fly? That's really where I'm that's what I'm interested in figuring out and learning, which is why, going back to that other topic, I'm very much interested in trying to understand, is there an algorithm for the content that I search that would actually give me a real sense of what's true and not true, what's real and not real. So, if you've got questions and you're trying to figure things like that out, having some kind of a process like I've got here, where I'm using my task, pulling up the news, going over to a notebook and then putting it in, and then using prompts to actually rip it apart a little bit before I consume it, then maybe you've got an option to figure out, is this consensus narrative or is it not? And that's what I want my next iteration of this algorithm to do. Right now, it's using a persuasion filter. I'm looking at what kind of persuasive tactics are being used in the content that's being presented. Am I seeing lots of people or lots of terms to come up with what's going on. In other words, is somebody saying things and they're always using negative terminology for one person and positive terminology for that person's opponent? We see that every day, right? It's always out there in the news. So that's what this prompt was all about. The next prompt, on the other hand, for me, is going to be trying to identify and create a maximally truth-seeking prompt that iterates through the sources and says, where did the source come from? And can I find sources that fit that maximally truthful research mode? Because I'm not going to do experiments in every single thing that's going on out there. I'm not launching rockets, but I'm going to talk about rockets once in a while. I'm not, experimenting and building or creating electric cars, but I'll probably talk about Tesla here and there because these are things of interest to me. And I'm not going to experiment on battery formulations, but that's also very interesting to me. So I need to be able to identify where are the primary research elements and where are the consensus research elements that were used to develop that content. And that's really what I'm going to be trying to focus on in my prompts going forward, and also in what I talk about and what I'm trying to do in the show. So with that in mind, that's why I'm finding it fascinating to talk about this deepfakes element. And if we go down here to the bottom, I can come up and just take a peek at what is going on here. So Grok deepfakes are currently identified as a major subject of controversy and debate within the tech crypto sector of the news cycle, right? So, and it totally makes sense. The trending debate, Grok deepfakes as a top trending headline on X. Like I said, I got taken in by one yesterday with the cat falling down into the well of the carpet forever, even though that was not really what was happening. And the ability to look at when those deepfakes happen, what is the responsibility of the platform? Should they be doing something? So, when you look at what's going on with X, they've published their algorithm. So that'll be worth reading, looking at, understanding. And then secondarily, whether or not we can read it and, from the code perspective, I don't know, but we can use tools like Grok or like Claude or some of these other AIs to actually condense the information within that. So you grab the algorithm in a text file or something, put it into one of these tools, and then say, now make this a short, give me a bullet by bullet thing on each section of this algorithm, and tell me what's in it so that I can determine whether or not it's maximally truthful or truth-seeking in reality. So that's one aspect. And then the second aspect is when you see things coming out, how do you detect? And that's why I'm trying to do this workflow that basically says, here's a task that gathers the data. Once I gather the data, I put it into a tool that allows me to run my chosen prompt against it so that I can get try and get as much information based on how that prompt interprets the data. So that's kind of the step-by-step that I'm thinking about, and I'm trying to determine where that should go in my future iterations of this. So one of the, let's just see if there's anything else in here. So the deepfakes represent the technological apex of this phenomenon. They allow for the creation of a completely fabricated visual reality that's indistinguishable from truth. And that's actually one of the things Scott said right off the bat, which was, by the way, you can't trust video anymore. Absolutely right. Especially now with this. And the fact that you can actually, so here's literally this article, even though I didn't put this in my prompt when I did the search over on X, it came up with exactly this, which is, where visual animals were easily influenced. And I read this wrong. I was thinking that was going to be actually talking about the deepfakes that are totally animals, which could or could not be true. And there's so many bizarre and interesting videos that are I think going to be generated on the fly because of something you watched. So if you watched the cat falling down into the giant well that is nothing but a carpet in front of the couch, if you watch one of those, now you're going to see 10 of them. And I experienced that. I noticed that. So that's what, the minute you click on something and observe it, the algorithm is going to change. And what's really bizarre about that is it kind of goes to the fact that our algorithms are going to become the equivalent of quantum phenomena observation. The whole Schrodinger's cat thing is there a cat in the box or not? We can't tell. Is the cat alive or dead? We can't tell. You don't know until you open the box. And so as a result, from a quantum state perspective, there is a cat in there. It may or may not be dead or alive. And we would only be able to determine that by observing. So we have to take it as a given that the cat exists because we've created a partial reality until we open the box, the yes-no decision to open the box, that both exist until you make a choice, and then it drops the other one in favor of, the prime reality that you exist in becomes even more real because when you open that box, now you know the state of that, what's ever inside that box. So definitely a bizarre phenomenon, but that Schrodinger's cat is going to become the algorithm that we live through every single day on X, YouTube, your TV. This morning, my wife and I were joking. My son shared with me he noticed a video happening on, it was a commercial for Subway, and it made him laugh out loud. It was one of the first commercials that he had seen in a long time that just made him laugh out loud. And so my wife and I were like, what can we do to see that? Because one of the things we identified is that commercial was truncated when we went to look at it on the internet. The punchline, the part that was funny, actually was missing from the video that we got online. So with that said, it was like, okay, how do we trigger it so that it'll show up? So we just started talking about how much we love Subway subs, and so we're assuming that Alexa in the background or our cell phone or something or even our PCs will pick some thread of that up and then have an impact on the commercials that come up over the next period of time. So I assume sometime today we'll probably see a Subway advertisement. Whether it's that one, I don't know, but we'll probably see a Subway advertisement at some point. That'll be kind of interesting. So from my perspective, we're all experimenting in our lives right now with trying to figure out how to influence these algorithms so that we actually have the base reality that we want. Every time you influence the algorithm, you've basically made an A-B choice or ABC choice that determines whether or not Schrodinger's cat is in the box or not, whether that cat's alive or dead. So maybe ABC. And, how will you know what reality is when the algorithm for everything you watch and everything you do and everything you see, at least as it relates to a screen, is going to be driven by something an algorithm puts in front of you? And the only way to combat that, from everything that I can see, is that we all have to have our own AI. We have to have an offline, external, separate AI that we understand that the configurations are ours, that we can actually make sure that we have our own version of it. So I remember one of the first things when my first exposure to AI was about 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, much older than that, actually. I've been exposed to AI for a lot of years, most of it in the form of machine learning, going all the way back to like 2002 when we were looking at camera feeds for SARS-1 with the infrared sensor that would determine whether or not you had a fever when you walked into a building. And, that goes all the way back to 2003. But that kind of stuff is very structured and very intrinsic to an application. And it was built within the application, within the software that ran the camera. So as a result, you had nothing to tweak. There was no place for you to go in and say, no, I want it this way. Now, I'm going to say 2022, I went to a prompt engineering class at Google in Boston, and it opened my eyes to a lot of what was coming. And being, I'm not an AI expert like some, and I'm certainly not writing code or anything like that or building things in AI other than being a super user of AI. And so, I'm probably far ahead of about 50% of the population because I'm a super user and because I've used so many different tools with AI. But that's definitely not, I'm definitely not an AI expert per se. And that's where, my habit is to have all of these tools at my disposal up front, ready to go, so that I'm instantly running. And I'm not sure if you can see what I've got, so I'm going to bring this smaller. So I've got a tool that puts all of the LLMs right out front for me to look at, and I can dive into any one of them anytime. And one of the truth-seeking perspectives that we've had, or I've had, and others have postulated, is use 2 or 3 different AIs. Never use one. So if you're looking at, you do some kind of a search on AI, check it in ChatGPT, check it in Gemini, check it in Grok, check it in Claude, check it in Perplexity. And if you could do the free version of all of those and be just fine, or you could do potentially a paid version, like I'm paid on Grok and Gemini. So for those two, I can actually go in and use the super chat and figure out if there's any, do a deeper dive than the free versions. So being able to pull that kind of content and then have a basis for comparison between multiple searches, that's been the default up to this point, to say, how do you filter through and find these things? Now I'm beginning to hope that there's going to be this ability to create these distinct, unique prompts that whenever you do a search, you have a prompt profile that will allow you to do that. So if I go back over here and I go to Grok, one of the things that you can do on your Grok is go down here and customize, go into your settings and look at customizing it, and you can have a custom prompt at the beginning of every single search that you do. So this custom prompt is where I would put that maximally truth-seeking algorithm or weighting system, so that whatever it finds, it will infer or it'll defer to this prompt to winnow through the data. And that's where I'm going to go moving forward with all of the prompts once I find this. In the short run, before I find the maximally truth-seeking algorithm, if there is one available over here on this multiplex.com, I'll probably experiment, real experimentation, not secondhand or secondary. I'll do my own experimentation to figure out what kind of prompt works. And I'll use this as a great example because it's right here in front of me, and experiment with it and see if it works. So over time, I'll do what I can to share that information as I go. And, if you are interested in any of that, please let me know, because I find this type of concept really fascinating. And it is actual real world experimentation that we all can do to see how the AIs respond to whatever it is that we put together. But, this multiplex site, I would encourage you to take a peek at it if you get a chance. The idea that you can, this one experiment here, I'm following it and finding it rather fascinating. Basically, he's got Grok operating as a CEO, and then he's got other AIs as other executive roles. I think Claude is the primary. And what he's doing is an experiment to take a company that had been bankrupt in the past, grabbing all of the information associated with that company, sticking it on a single laptop, and putting a discrete offline AI on that topic, on that content, and then having these AIs run the company. And they're having like 15-minute, they're having board meetings every 15 minutes to set the tone and direction for all of the agents that are being used by Claude to run the company. And, we don't know how, the output of this should be very interesting. So I'm following it to find out. I don't know if it's just made up and it's just a thought experiment, or if it's real. I assume it's real because the variations and the interesting directions that it seems to be taking just in the past few days seems to be pretty intense. And then there's some other really interesting articles like, navigating the end of work as we know it, the de-skilling aspect of being able to stop being so specialized and start being more of a generalist. I would call that great advice no matter what, because if you go back to things that were happening in the last century, people were generalists before they were specialists. We only started specializing when we started our institutional college educations, where we, to be a PhD is to study one particle, right? It's to study one cell, one form of existence, one type of writing, one type of thing, to the point where it's exhaustive and deep just incredibly deep. So for me, I think that being able to have a good understanding of all of the different things that are happening with AI, all of the different things that are going to affect us with AI, and recognizing where the AI is embedded in our lives and trying to identify and work through that, that's really the focus that I've got going forward. And the other thing that caught my eye when I came to this site, it just seemed to me that maybe that was a Dilbert-like figure. I came across this page only days after Scott passed. So, kind of looks like Dilbert walking with Scott, kind of, but it's an AI generated image. So, but yeah, I think that this is the article over here that had the consensus architecture that I was talking about, that has this perspective on a cathedral of consensus. So it's fascinating, some of the things that we can dig into, and I will be digging into in my daily show going forward. And I do intend to keep it a little bit off the cuff like this. And ideally, maybe I'll be interacting with some chat as people drop into it. And we'll build, I'll determine whether or not I'm going to post every recording, because not every recording is going to be on the nose or have a good topic, things like that. So I may or may not always post something after the fact from an edited video perspective. I may only do the live stream on each individual day, but we'll see how it goes. And for those of you who are watching this and joined me and maybe watched it to this duration, thank you. I'm going to step off of the stream here today now. I hope this was worth your time and that you had you were able to get something out of it, something useful, because that is the only reason that I'm doing this, is to try and help people and do something useful. So